Why, hello there. Welcome to the stream. Yeah, it's Friday. It's Friday. Thanks, everyone, for checking in as you arrive. And as it is Friday, it is my desire to go into the OSR subreddit and see what's going on. I appreciate going in there. I like going in there. I find it fun to delve in there, and other folks seem to as well. Let me take this off for a second. I don't have a lot of preamble today. Here is the OSR subreddit as we know and love, and I really do enjoy going in here. Poking around, seeing what kind of interesting things are being posted and discussed in the community. I think it's made for good stuff to talk about for us, for me, and hopefully for you. And of course, as usual, let me know if the levels of anything seems amiss. Everything looks good from the little bars and lights and things that I see. But if I sound off or look off, well, maybe not answer that one. If I sound off, let me know. Okay, I'm just going to hit refresh, and as usual, I have not gone through, I have not pre-read any of these, I have not looked at them, I am doing this. Your first glance here in the stream is my first glance as well, and I'm going to try to get better at doing this early on, which I know is probably annoying, but man, creators, you gotta promote. It's part of the job. So while you're in here, as you come in, hit the thumbs up. If you enjoy this, or we just started, if you feel like you will enjoy this, and I hope I won't let you down in that regard, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And of course, if you're in here and you're thinking, boy, I like you, I like the way you talk, like the way you walk, even though I'm sitting down, then please go ahead and subscribe. It helps me out with the algorithms. It doesn't really do any harm to you other than letting you know when I post stuff. And if you are just finding me now, I've been running as much as I can daily streams at about this time on a variety of topics. But Fridays is OSR Reddit days if I can swing it. So here we go. Okay, that's kind of a silly one. Or not, I wouldn't say silly. I'll give it an upvote. What names do you use to describe the Dungeons & Dragons basic set and subsequent sets? Expert, Companion, Master, Immortal. That's Beckme, BECM. I say it's a silly question. It really isn't, and it's one of those questions that I'm sure just befuddles people when they get into all the acronyms and other things. 3 LBBs, B/X, Beckme, RC, 1E. There's a lot of acronyms. What OSR system best emulates AD&D? I tend to think of OSRIC, OSRIC. New to OSR, looking for tips for writing a one-shot. I don't know if there's much. One-shots are tricky. And I think they require a flexibility on the part of the GM mostly, and a particular kind of buy-in from the players. You're running a one-shot, and I'm assuming a one-shot they mean kind of a one-night, one-day, one-game session stand. Players have to sort of be on a same page too, as far as we're not going to fiddle-faddle on stuff that isn't important. We're not going to make it a chore to get into the adventure. I like to start one shots where you're kind of already in the adventure, so there's not even you're at the inn or the tavern, and you want the players to look at the job board or talk to somebody or whatever, or that person's going to come up and try to talk to them. The approach is fine, and a lot of players will just be like, "Oh, Greg, you have a mission for us? Great, give it to us. Let's go." But that could just easily turn into sometimes there's a weird thing where sometimes players in a bunch of different circumstances can become almost the word I'm looking for is escaping me at the moment, but just not Um, they are not helpful to the cause of the table, which is getting an adventure. They'll sort of be obstinate. Oh, what, you want me to go on this thing? Why? What do you want? What are you really after? I want to look to see who else might have other missions I want to go on. It's like, dude, it's a one shot. This is the guy. Talk to the guy, get the adventure hook, and then go. Don't need to go look at other guys. You don't need to do that. The other thing is, if you can cut down on let's spend an hour at the front of this thing buying all our equipment and all that stuff. You can do things like give people just bundles of gear. You can roll randomly, or just have some sort of common sense gear sets they can have, and then you can just start them. Hey, the preamble becomes, you were given this job in town. Now you find yourself in front of the dungeon or on the edge of the wilds or whatever it is. Right now, go. And that kind of cuts out a lot of those things that shouldn't really be obstacles, but they can be. But even if they're not obstacles, they're kind of time wasters. It's not what the adventure is about. On a one shot, you really want to stick to what the adventure is about, because there's going to be enough time wasting and things that don't go right inside the one shot. So you want to save time as much as you can. Hey, none nothing's in the chat. Hey, none nothing. In their opinion, OSR is not well suited to one shots. Not enough time for emergent story. A narrative story-ish game is easier for a one shot. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely stuff in the greater OSR experience that you will miss out on. But I think if it's an intro, a real intro, not like Keep on the Borderlands, which I think is a good first kind of mini campaign, but like an intro, like Tomb of the Serpent Kings. You can give people a real feel for what the turn-by-turn, moment-by-moment life is like for an OSR character in an OSR game. And I think it is useful for that. Yes, you don't get a lot of the, I've mistreated my hirelings over 4 or 5 weeks, and finally a reaction roll or a morale roll has gone seriously south, and here's the consequence of that, or some of the other things that might come out. But you're still going to get, wandering monsters and being able to bargain with them or make deals. You'll still get a fair amount of stuff. So, well, I agree, I don't think you're getting 100%, but I think with any one shot, you're not getting 100% of the system. You're always going to be able to make the case that certain things about a game are not going to be revealed in this little short block. But I think it is useful for some things. Hey, Fred Daniel, he says, OSR has given me so much joy in recent years and has allowed me to feel like I still belong in this hobby. That's awesome. I love to hear that. And then None Nothing says, agreed, I run one shots for new players. Yeah, it's great for new players. Or if you just have some time, maybe your party. For me, OSR, again, I'm using BX as the base, is easy for me to run. So if I was in a bigger gaming group or another gaming group, and maybe I'm even just a player, I'm not the GM. GM can't make it, or a certain amount of players can't make it. I feel like I could pick up something at OSR, go to Donjon and find a random map, or go to Dice and Logos and pull up one of his maps, and I could probably run something. It might not be great, but I could do it as a kind of a filler thing, right? And you could roll up characters so fast, especially if you do stuff like, hey, 3d6 down the line. Oh, your strength is good. Great. You pick either a fighter, or really more likely a fighter, maybe a dwarf, right? And you just go down really fast and kind of create something, and then be on your way, right? As opposed to 5th edition, where it feels like you want to spend half your one shot creating characters if you're going to do that. Okay, we got high fantasy, low fantasy, and cheap fantasy. I'm not sure what that is. We have a map designing cities and citadels. Let's see, looking for an interesting way. All right, this one might be, I like this one because I see this one come up a lot. Not necessarily in terms of OSR, but just in general. Looking for an interesting way. Let me repeat that. Looking for an interesting way to do a gladiatorial or melee tournament. Posted by Premaximum. Hey all, I'm running a campaign in Black Hack 2nd Edition right now, and my players have been invited to participate in a tournament-style melee by an NPC group. I am looking for ideas for running it that aren't just do combat. Anyone have suggestions? Why, yes, Premaximum and anybody else who is interested in this concept, I do have ideas. And my biggest idea, the biggest thing that I think you should do, is look at how those kinds of plots, those kinds of backgrounds are handled in things like movies. And if you notice in a lot of movies, and I don't know if I've read any books that really revolved around gladiatorial arena. That's kind of the whole book. But if you look at, say, okay, I'll use one, Gladiator. you'll notice that there's battles, of course, in the arena, but a lot of the actual meat takes place outside of the arena. And I think this is a mistake that happens in a lot of games. And I can't say I've seen it personally because I haven't. But when I read up on how people are planning these, and I've read out some of them how they've turned out, I think the mistake a lot of GMs make is they put all their thought into what's going to happen in the arena. And that can be fun. Right? There's nothing, I'm not saying that you shouldn't think about what happens in the arena. How you can escalate battles, maybe how the arena changes. Is it just a mundane arena? But even in a mundane arena, if you go back to Gladiator, they could do some neat stuff. How they can reconfigure it, add water, add pits, add columns. And I think if you read back at the stuff that the historical Colosseum was capable of doing, there's some really interesting, neat stuff. And that's before you add in the fact that we're probably playing a fantasy game where you have magic and all kinds of other stuff. So you can look at that and say, okay, there's neat stuff I can do with the combats. But I think too many folks, they just go down a rabbit hole of the combats. And then the only thing they'll tend to have, I see it often, is, well, they can bet on each other outside between matches. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, there's gambling is fun. Betting on yourselves, I suppose, as the party, or if you want to be funky and bet on other people and other brackets, if you're doing a tournament style game, is fine. When we look at Gladiator, for example, you'll see that most of the movie, I think, of running time purposes, isn't in the arena. We all remember kind of the first battle where everyone's kind of going nuts. I think there's maybe a second battle, and then I think they might have done kind of highlights. Yeah, I don't know. It's been a while since I've been Gladiator, but there's maybe I think maybe 6 battles in the arena, and I'm not even including the final duel with between Maximus and I forget his name, the bad Caesar. And there's the one where he fights the veteran gladiator. There's the where they do that they reenact that battle from the Punic Wars. There's maybe the first battle where he's chained to another guy who's peeing himself, and I don't know. There's another one where I forget the one guy who I think was always like Arnold Schwarzenegger stunt double in the Conan movies or something like that, or he was somebody, I don't know. He was like a red is the god's color, that one. But Gladiator's over 2 hours long, and there's just 4 or 5 battles in there, and those battles are not D&D battles. They're not lasting potentially an hour as you're running them. They're fast. So you think about, well, you take out those 5-6 battles. What else is going on? Well, a lot. Now, in Gladiator, they have the option, which you will not have in your game, of having, a B-story Commodus. As the bad Caesar was Commodus, right? Of what's happening with Commodus and Commodus's sister and that whole thing, and a little bit with the senators talking, right? You don't have aspect of that. But there's going to be a lot of time should build in outside the arenas for the story within the story. So we have a group, they invite the players to commit and play in this tournament. What's really going on? It could be, well, is the tournament there just for the reason it might be stated on the tin, which is, bread and circuses. We're just going to have fun to take people's minds off whatever, or just put on an entertaining show and make some money through betting and through attendance and selling T-shirts and blankets and tapestries with the winners on it. Of course, that's one way. And then if that is that, then maybe you could think about, well, you have this thing coming to town for a week or 2 weeks, however long this tournament's supposed to last. That becomes an event that other forces will try to use to their advantage. So, okay, so you have gambling. Well, that might mean that you have, if there's a thieves guild or some kind of mafia type organization that's going to want to get a piece of the gambling action, there's going to be a lot of money there. So going back to thieves again, are people going to make a play to try to bust in and take the earnings wherever they're stored? Is there going to be some kind of heist? Are the players going to think about, well, we could plan some kind of heist? Is it going to turn into something? I just watched this movie with Batista where it's basically Die Hard in a soccer stadium, where these terrorists, they take over the soccer stadium, they lock it down using the soccer stadium's own security controls to lock it down, and they're looking for a particular person in the crowd. That could be an angle. Is somebody prominent going to be there, right? As in the Gladiator concept, right there in the owner's box, so to speak, is bad Caesar Commodus. Maybe someone wants to get to Commodus, and that could be a plot that is ongoing. Perhaps it's also a way for people to meet kind of undercover, right? You're going to have hundreds, thousands of people in this area. What kind of things, what factions might be able to meet up and link up and do so in a kind of a way that's basically going to be given camouflage by the fact that there is a gladiatorial tournament going on. There are other movies too that do something similar. I think of Jean-Claude Van Damme's Bloodsport has some similar. I think there's more fighting in Bloodsport. That one, they have some fun with showing a bunch of the different combats, but you'll notice that Jean-Claude's not in that many of them, and he has his own. There is another B story of what's happening kind of within the tournament that, of course, ties into him versus what's his name, Bolo Young at the end. But there's something, I think there was like a government agent, and there's some other things going on, but it's not just wall to wall fighting. Now in Bloodsport, I think some of the fun of it, I think, is showing all these different fighting styles going off against each other, but they do it in very fast manner. Those fight sequences, especially the ones without Van Damme in them, and maybe the other guy, the guy from Animal House, I think is in. I forget the big kind of hairy dude from Animal House is in it, or not Animal House. I mean, Revenge of the Nerds is in it. They're very short, right? So they're almost like, hey, for the audience in a visual medium like film, it works out kind of nice because it's 5 minutes, maybe even less. It's been forever since I've seen Bloodsport, so I haven't timed these scenes out, but really short, quick. They just do a couple of highlights and then bam, it's over. It's that kind of thing, hard to do in terms of an actual combat. You could kind of narrate some moments, but again, you want to think about, well, when the party's not fighting, what's happening? Because I actually think that what's happening outside the stuff, especially if you're able to weave it into the fighting, that's going to make all the difference. If it's just going to be essentially a corridor, if you think of it mentally, like just fight, end, it's kind of boring, right? And in a gladiatorial system, you don't even have the stuff that's in a dungeon to intersperse the fighting. You are literally, it's the equivalent of going through a dungeon, which is just room, door, room, and in each room's the combat, right? So you really want to give them stuff to hold their interest outside of it. Let them interplay with things, let them, see what else is going on. It could be a great way to add some world building in, but you want to really build in that stuff that's outside the combat. And too often, all I see is people talking about, well, what are they going to do in the arena? And in the arena is maybe I think kind of the least interesting part from a DM's perspective, and I think somewhat from the player's perspective. And you have to remember, right? If you build in too many of these combat events, they're going to take their toll on you creatively, because it's hard to keep upping the ante. It's easy to go from, okay, it's sand, now we're going to have water, now we're going to this. But, you keep trying to do that, and especially in a fantastic sense, you can really burn through your imagination. And it can also get overwhelming. So really think about what else is happening, what other plots, what are factions going to do with this whole event? And then how can I pull the party potentially into these factional things, or make them aware of it, or perhaps they're attached to factions, so that might play into it. Because remember, the PCs are going to be, assuming they're in this tournament, maybe they get to be in a different part of the arena, and maybe there's something that the factions need that are where the gladiators stay and not where the audiences are, in the bowels of the arena, and only the party can get there. So if some kind of faction sponsor can get them a message, maybe they have to go under the arena. And what could be under the arena? I don't know, but it might be adventurous. Right, but they might have a time limit because they got to get back for their match. So better hop to it. All right, got some stuff in the chat I just want to hit through here. John Lennon says, going back to one-shots, always create the characters for them. Yeah, that's a good. Terrence chiming in. Hey, Terrence says, for goodness sake, figure out how you're going to adjudicate gambling beforehand. Yes, right. It goes without saying, if you're going to have a gambling system, don't run it ad hoc. Keep track of the odds. Come up with some way where you can calculate the odds that seems fair, and then don't complain if the players win. If you're using some kind of mass combat rule or just some way to hand wave, I'm just going to roll some D20s, and that's going to say which ones win. And you come up with a guy who's 1,000 to 1, and that one PC says, I put all my gold in the center on the 1,000 to 1, and they hit. Give it to them. Don't start thinking about, well, how can I screw them out? How can I get rid of this gold? You created that problem. You don't want guys with 1,000 to 1 odds. Don't do it for fun, and then be surprised when it happens, because it will happen. It's like a guarantee. I guarantee it will happen. Nothing says exactly 100% neat story outside of the ring. Also use sports movies, not just fighting movies, as templates. Rocky, even Major League or Mighty Ducks. Conflicts and growth happen around the ring. Yes. The reason why I think more of using fighting movies is because they tend to be in one place. Not that a gladiator fight has to be, right? But the nice thing with Rocky is or a sports movie is there's days and weeks between things, right? So Rocky, you're training for a fight, you have weeks. So you got a lot of time to play with all kinds of other stuff and movement of place. With fighting movies, usually they constrict that. If you think of things like Game of Death, you're on an island, or Mortal Kombat, right? They shrink down how far you can move, which really puts more pressure on you to have stuff where they are, because usually you've taken away either just because of the time between the fights or because you're following that kind of template that they don't get to leave and go home. They don't get to go on the road. They don't get bus rides. They don't get to go to different towns. They don't get to leave and have adventures at their hotels. Like, usually it's kind of like you're on the premises and you're staying on the premises until it's over. Now, you don't have to run your fight like that. That might be an interesting alternate way to look at these gladiator fights, is what if it was a tournament that toured the kingdom or the empire or the whatever territory they're in, and so you can get some of that. You can get extra downtime in between ones. Different factors can come into play, right? You can do it. There's no reason not to, but a lot of times they seem to follow that sort of, you're in the spot and you're running through fights until you drop or until you are victorious. So keep in mind what kind of template you're using and think about how you might take those templates and kind of turn them on their head a little bit. There's no reason to follow it, right? If there's a different way to do it and there's no reason to keep them trapped in a singular place, then, don't. But those are my suggestions. Let's just see what, let me wait before I forget, upvote for your Redditor. Let's see what some of the commenters said in case they hit upon some things that I did not think about. Vaden says, let's see, none of these are actual mechanics, but try to throw in some intrigue and downtime between rounds. Write up a short description of a few patrons and maybe their motivations or relationships with one another. Put some small benefit to befriending one or more, like one will help you cheat, one will give you intel, etc. Is the tournament to the death? What are the stakes? Yeah, those are decent things. But you notice here, he says, hey, throw in some downtime, but he's reflecting it back towards the fight. Whereas I'm saying is have stuff going on that's not just reflecting the fight, but other things. Maybe there's someone on an opposing team who in some moment is going to planning to kill the bad Kaiser, the bad Caesar. So you're trying to figure out who of these other teams, where's the guy, who is this assassin who's masquerading as another gladiator. And then you're trying to figure that out and worm your way, maybe talk to them, maybe see how they fight, whatever, right? It's all these kind of things you can do. Not just, how can I get a little bonus for the next fight? That's fine, and I'm not saying you can't have those things, but don't make that all that's happening in your tournament setup. Get the crowd involved, also fine, but again, right, they're reflecting back on the fight and not so much on the other fight. And then someone again talking about combat. I guess they're all fine, but like I said, I feel like they're all falling into that same trap of just looking at the combat part. Look outside the combat. Look beyond. What is the tournament's purpose? Who's putting on the tournament? Why are they putting on the tournament? And then who could take advantage of that tournament? For what purposes and why? Think about those questions and really build that up. And again, I think once you start thinking about that stuff, the tournament becomes actually the least interesting itself, becomes the least interesting part. But that's me. All right, so that was gladiatorial or melee tournament. Let's see. Someone's looking for OSE advice, old school essentials. I guess I'll check it out. I'm not that knowledgeable of OSE as its own thing, but let's see what his question is. This is supposed to buy Impossible Tornado. Let's make it possible. Take an upvote, Mr. Tornado. Hey, everyone. I'm getting ready to run my first OSE game Labor Day weekend, and I'm looking for some advice. I'm not new to OSR, as I've been running DCC, that being Death Cab for Cutie, for 5 or 6 years, and more recently I've run and played some more Borg. but this will be my first time with anything BX. I'm doing Keep on the Borderlands to get that true basic set experience, but I'm running it as a one-shot. You really can't run Keep on the Borderlands as a one-shot. I don't know how you're going to do that, and I don't know how much time you would need. But, hey, that's what he's chosen as his lot, so let's see what he's got. I've already found some great tips for making it fit in one session. Start the party in the Caves of Chaos, give them a clear objective, utilize the conflicts between the different monstrous clans, and I'm going to provide pre-gens to save on time. I'm also thinking of starting the PCs at level 3 and using some of the advanced fantasy classes to give the players more options and make them a little more powerful, although I'll, of course, have plenty of backups for when they inevitably die. Does anyone have other suggestions on how to make this work in 1 3 to 4 hour session? Should I ignore encumbrance or streamline it somehow so there's less bookkeeping? Should I skip wandering monster rolls since the place is already lousy with monsters? Anything else you can think of? And if anyone has successfully run this module as a one-shot, I'd love to hear what worked or didn't work for you. Edit, in case I wasn't clear, I'm skipping all of the Keep and Wilderness stuff for this one-shot, so it's more a question of what advice do you have for running some sort of Caves of Chaos as a one-shot. So if you're running this as a one-shot, I don't know why you really worry about encumbrance. They're not going to get back to the Keep or do anything. So, I mean, if I'm running this, if I'm in this one-shot as a player, it's all about the objective at this point. I'm not leveling this guy up. I'm not going back to the Keep to carry all whatever gold and loot I get. So the only thing I'm worried about as a player at this point is what's good equipment. You know, better armor than my starting armor, better weapon than my starting weapon. Obviously, if there's something magical, or maybe if I'm a magic user, are there some scrolls or staves or staffs or whatever I can use? Are there potions? Are there that kind of stuff, right? I'm not concerned about gold because it's going to be meaningless to me unless we're going to say we're going to put a score on it and we want to run it like, hey, get your high score. How much gold can you cart out of there? But then I would want to keep encumbrance because it's still useful and it adds to that gaminess of what do you do? Do you pick a spot and bring all your loot there and try to hoard it there in the short term while you're exploring? I wouldn't do this. I guess is my first thing. I wouldn't do this. The Caves of Chaos, even putting them right in the Caves of Chaos, and unfortunately I don't have mine here to show, there's about a bunch of different entrances into the caves, right? And it I think for a one-shot, being a little bit more linear can be helpful because you can get that kind of analysis paralysis, and I could see certain parties going towards one cave entrance. Nope, that didn't work. Okay, let's try another cave entrance. Nope, that didn't work. Let's try another one. Nope, and then kind of, well, what do we do, right? And if we don't get in that groove of talking to the one group, or maybe we just roll poorly on our reaction rolls and they're all somewhat hostile, what are we going to do, right? It's you have the kind of openness that I think works really great as kind of a first campaign type setting or mini campaign where you can really explore all this stuff. I think works a little bit against it as a one-shot style mission, but it talks about somebody had already mentioned giving them a clear objective. And I would say definitely yes. They have to have a clear objective. I might even put them in one of the caves. Maybe what I do is put them somewhere in the caves, and it's one of those very worn tropes. But right, you're the prisoners, but your bonds have loosened, and you can kind of break free by putting them already in the cave. In a cave, they don't have to make a decision about which cave to go in. They're going to be inside, and I might even change it so some of the entrances that are open are closed to kind of push them to be exploring further into the dungeon and not leaving the dungeon and then getting caught with that same sort of analysis paralysis that you might get looking at it before. I don't think you're really playing into the strengths of it, and I don't know in a one shot how much these different factions can really play off each other. Certainly in the short term, hey, we're going to let us go and we're going to take care of those guys. But if taking care of those guys, like say you meet up with the goblins and they say, oh, we hate the bugbears. If you take care of them, we'll be your pals. Right? Great. But in a one shot, okay, you take care of the bugbears, maybe you explore a little bit. But if that doesn't lead you closer to your goal, you're raising your profile with this faction of goblins for no real reason. And you don't know which one of these is going to help you. In the original, you kind of just want to play them amongst each other because you know you're going to kind of eventually have to either get to the bottom of it or potentially clear them all out anyway. So you really are about trying to pick your enemies, make temporary friendships, but you have that time to kind of think about things scattered out. In a one shot, especially if it's just 3 hours, you don't have a lot of time to get into it with all these different factions or really develop anything. It's really just about, hey, will you let us through? But to where? And that's where coming up with that objective that makes sense, that they can, is kind of knowable for them in some way. Because you got, if you say to someone, a party, hey, somewhere behind one of these 16 doors is the princess, find them. And there's no way to tell which door the princess is on there, but you got to kind of go through one of them. And I don't think all those caves connect. So it's going to be doing something in here and then backing out, going another one, backing out, right? Oh, your princess is in another castle. Your princess is in another cave, backing out, going in, backing out. It's inefficient. And I think for one shot, I want something more efficient that they can do. So given that we're using the Caves of Chaos, I would want to close up some of those cave entrances to give them more of a finite choices to push them forward. And then I want to have more interconnectivity in those caves to make sure that they can get around without having to do a bunch of back out kind of stuff. And then as far as wandering monsters, it is slower, especially if they turn into fights, but it also could lead to allies. Maybe I would rework the wandering monster tables to put maybe some things that can be more outwardly non-hostile, like other adventuring parties or prisoners or thralls that can be dealt with in a way that can move them forward without turning into needless combats, something of that such. But it's definitely suboptimal to me. And nothing says, if you run this as a one-shot, all you're really doing is using one of the maps, which is fine, but a map isn't a module. Yes, this is true. I'd run them through something like Tomb of the Serpent Kings, or if you want something less teachy, I'm not sure which one. Let's see what some of the comments say. Oh, wait, did I forget? No, I gave him an upvote. I'm definitely curious. Here's Offended Defender. Take an upvote, Mr. Defender. They say a few tips on running one-shots in general. A party of 46 players in a 3 to 4 hour session will only be able to get through about 8 to 12 things: rooms, locations, hexes, etc., with 4 to 6 of those being meaningful interactions, combat, traps, puzzles, etc., and the rest being fairly quick flavor pieces. One-shots work best with a specific in media res goal that unites the group and drives them forward. Something like you've been contracted to retrieve a necklace stolen by goblins and will be given double the reward if you can bring it back by midnight. This also sets a time limit to prevent folks from getting caught up in a meaningless room. For the Caves of Chaos, focus on a single branch, preferably with a single faction. That'll keep things focused and allow your players to get a sense of completion by the end. It's okay to truncate things in the service of time. Maybe instead of going through the motions of disabling a trap, you just quickly describe the party figuring it out. It's not the greatest solution, but stuff like that cuts down on time while still providing most of the intended flavor. This is entirely based on personal preference, but you may want to avoid stuff like strict turn tracking, light tracking, and complex inventory management. There's stuff that can bog down a one-shot a bit and deal more with long-term implications that the players will never see the result of. Yep, that is excellent advice from Offended Defender. All right. Monster Hunter Banjo, take an upvote. Says, if you think of each class being good at tackling different challenges, and if you're going to be considerate of each class feeling like they have a niche of things they can do to contribute, it might be good to think about the thieves actually doing some quote-unquote climbing challenges instead of lock-picking or sneaking type challenges, because of their naturally higher chance to succeed at climbing rather than the lock-picking or other traditional things you might expect the thief to do. Yeah, I mean, not a terrible thing. I don't tend to play my games like that, or run my games like that. I know it's something that comes out more in the modern game with the spotlighting. I mean, I'm not against it, putting in some stuff knowing that they can climb better or be better. I mean, yes, and it's when you're playing a low level thief, unless you've juiced up those numbers, when you look at your percentage chances of success on stuff, you're going, egads, that's low. But as I made a whole video about the OSR thief, and I think you're really, in my opinion, give them the mundane stuff for free and put the rolls to them when it's something extraordinary, or it's something be almost impossible for, say, the fighter to do. Then it becomes something that your thief rolls for. At least that's my opinion. Okay, so we got some other ones talking about it's not intended. All right, I think that's it. I'm not sure. I'm curious why they picked keep on the Borderlands, other than maybe that's just what they have on hand. It sounded like this person was responding to somebody else saying that they're going, meeting friends either from out of town or they're going out of town. I guess they just want to take something with them. Tomb of the Serpent Kings is out there and it's free, and you just got to download it. I'm sure there are other freebie ones. Some of those one page dungeons will probably work as well. I definitely would, if I had the chance, think I'm really the best suited for a one shot as opposed to let me shoehorn this into a one shot. But again, that's just me. Let's see. When is a game too high fantasy to be OSR? All right, this is an interesting one. Posted by Maloch Master. I don't know. Or sorry, Madolce Master. I don't know. Something. And Nothing does say, hey, make it yourself. It's not hard, I promise. Yeah. There's totally nothing wrong with making it yourself. Absolutely. Okay. This one might be deep, might be shallow. Let's see. When is a game too high fantasy to be OSR? Posted by the aforementioned Madolce Master. This is obviously a fairly subjective question, but I'm curious about the response I'd get. OSR is often linked to the more mundane, torch-counting, gritty settings where the more reality-bending magic is lost or responsible for the dungeons rather than used by the players actively. OSR sci-fi exists too, of course, with wild technology and space magic. But what about a high-level, high-fantasy OSR where wizards can plane shift, go talk to gods, and delve into literal hell for treasures weighed in souls? At what point does that stop being OSR? Does it stop being OSR? I don't think it stops being OSR. I think all those things exist. The original D&D Demigods, which I think Gygax regretted publishing as soon as he did, because then it was all about, look, I killed Orcus and stuff that I don't think they intended. But look, once you put a stat block on something, you can't blame folks for just going, ooh, let me see how I compare that stat block and what can I do to get there and get enough magical gear that I can teleport there and kill them. So I think that's kind of a self-created problem. But, I mean, certainly, I think people, myself included, prefer more low-level OSR because it does highlight the grittiness. It does have that kind of moment-to-moment tension of survival that when you get a bunch of levels on you and get access to higher spells and more magic of all sorts becomes, it just kind of becomes a little bit of a different game. And that, whether you're going into domain play, which obviously becomes its own kind of mini game in a sense, or if you're dungeon delving, what it means to be in a dungeon changes, and the kind of the risks and challenges change, and you have to adapt with them. And yeah, maybe instead of going into, though people kept going into Castle Greyhawk and other mega dungeons, even when they were high level, the dungeons just keep getting deeper and the challenges getting greater. So it's not like you have to abandon that style of play. But certainly once you got into things like plane shifting and as the worlds around the initial settings became more and more developed, they came this capability to take your adventures on the road into just crazier, wilder, more dangerous, powerful places than just being in, Mystara or wherever, right? But they didn't stop being OSR. I don't think OSR really has anything to say about what the sort of magic level or what kind of ability stuff you have. And I think that's what they're getting. But this also gets, I see some of these are going to get into what different people's opinions of the OSRs, which is what makes the question even more sort of blobby. It's probably not the word I want to use. Imprecise, maybe, because what is OSR? Right? He's talking about, hey, look, talking to gods and plane shifting and high tons of magic, but there are OSR systems out of the box that give you that even at lower levels, because that's just part of their aesthetic. It's only really high level in the more toned down, maybe the ones that are more closely evocative or based on, say, something like BX, where that stuff you have to wait, right? But you Beck Me, the last book of Beck Me is immortal, or the sort of god tier. So, and that's, I don't think anyone would argue that somehow Beck Me is not OSR. So interesting question, interesting idea, I think. But I think maybe they're overthinking it. I think they're kind of overthinking things on that one. a bit. Okay, people. Okay, so there's a herbalist primer that's up on Kickstarter from Exalted Funeral. Oh, here we go. I always like these. All right. This is going to take us off site. I will paste a link to that in the chat. I'm also going to paste it in my little notebook so I don't forget about it. All right. We are looking at. Oh, I think I've been here before. Something else. I think I have. Maybe. Posted to the blog, Box Full of Boxes at Blogspot. Again, it's going into the chat. So check it out. If you're in here right now, check it out. It's going to take too long to type. Wizards Retreat Generator. Here we go. And I will try to remember to post this in the show notes so that if you're watching this after the fact and you want to check it out while we look it over, you can do that. Posted today. No, posted a week ago. And starts with a picture of, looks like one of those, is that from Howl's Moving Castle or one of the Miyazaki film of sorts? Some kind of moving contraption / abode with a quote from Game of Thrones: "Warlocks exert little influence in our politics. They rarely leave the confines of their House of the Undying. A pompous name, but I admit, a strange and dark tower. It is said that none who enter ever leave." That was Zaro Zoan Daxos. Or Zone, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. So there you go. Mages like towers. So this is now the text of the actual article itself, or the post, or hopefully the intro to this particular mechanic or generator. Mages like towers. It probably has something to do with being fearful of torch-wielding mobs, a desire for privacy, or maybe due to the frequency of their experiments escaping their control. Much like how a Ferrari or Maserati would be seen as an aspirational item in our world, perhaps spellcasters see towers similarly. Whatever the case, the lonely, isolated tower is a standby in science fiction of all stripes. Some aren't even towers. The only true requirement for a place like this is that the beings who originally built it intended it as a redoubt or hermitage to practice a mystical skill of some kind. Okay, so there's the intro. Here we get the generator. To use this generator, roll 4d8 and consult the tables below. I purposely tried to leave some of the answers vague for use by individual referees. Unsurprisingly, this table is of limited use for low or no magic worlds. Okay, so we're going to roll. It's really you're rolling a d8 4 times. And I would, putting on my editorial hat, I wouldn't say 4d8. I would say roll a d8 4 times and consult the tables below for each result. Something like that. That's just me quibbling. I'm a quibbler at times. Okay, so the first d8 is for the structure's form. On a 1, I'm just going to read through them. The numbers that they are on the die, I think are less important. So the options we get are a vehicle such as a walking hut, a ship, a caravan or wagon, a floating castle, and you can roll a d4 for one of those. A series of tunnels hewed into a mountain or cave, a classical wizard's tower. That one does have the highest odds of being rolled, just as an aside. A monastery, school, library, some other open place of learning, a castle, manse, or other opulent abode, or a simple rustic house. And then the next table is who lives or studies there. A powerful wizard like an archmage, a guild, college, or some other educational organization. It's completely abandoned. It's seemingly abandoned, but you're going to roll again and then ignore this result or the one before that says it's completely abandoned, and then whatever the new one is, it's hiding themselves somehow in the structure. Then you have no one, and there's some group that's guarding it to make sure that it stays no one. And then next you have nobody, the monsters who moved in or the experiments who escaped murdered everyone. A group of scavengers or looters have moved in and are attempting to plumb secrets they cannot understand. Or finally, a powerful mage or group of mages have moved in and taken the structure as their own. The rightful owners may be dead, ascended, or alive somewhere else. So it's kind of interesting because it's giving you a little bit of who might live there, but then a little bit of the history of it, right? Because saying a powerful mage or group have moved in, and they're explicit about this, is saying that they're not the people who built it. They just took over. There was somebody there before, and they took over and left. Interesting that they've got 4 different options for some type of abandon, which they probably could have compressed into maybe, say, taking 3 through 6, nobody, and then have a dice roll as to whether it's abandoned, only seemingly abandoned, or the 2 flavors of nobody. Either nobody because they won't, there's some outside group that's preventing it, or nobody because there's something inside that has prevented it, right? And then, let's see, we're on, I guess the 3rd table, where we get into what was studied or what was meant to be studied in this particular abode. We get necromancy, something else besides necromancy, a different school, rather. Something, whatever struck the fancy of the builders. Temporal or dimensional manipulation. The creation of strange chimeras, such as owlbears or displacer beasts. Immortality, so like a lich's tower or place, abode. Military magic, and then communion with gods beyond the stars. So I guess you're talking your cosmic horror sort of gods, not the, more wimpy gods of Olympus and places like that. And then defenses or quirks. It can move in some impossible way. It's bigger on the inside than the outside. There are no entrances or exits. You can only get in by magic. There's a ferocious guardian somewhere inside. It's shifted out of time and space in some way. It's made out of an obviously dangerous material. It's surrounded by a beguiling and maze-like structure. Forest, desert, lake, or seemingly normal terrain. Or it is in some kind of impossible location, upside down in a cliff face, within a volcano, or simply floating above the ground. Posted by Great Job. All right, so that's it. I don't have too much to add. I think it's fine. It's pretty simple, right? I think it gives you kind of things you know, the who, what, where. It doesn't give you a when. Might be an interesting table, like how long ago, how new or old is the structure. It's impossibly ancient. It's impossibly recent. Seems to be newish, seems to be oldish, right? Those are things that my players seem to ask about a lot. How old is it? Maybe when was the last time somebody was in here? So you could add that. Adding that temporal information. Obviously, if this stuff that's already here has given you these tables have already given you inspiration, you can just riff off of that. But that might be one of the things that might be interesting. But otherwise, yeah, it's a nice set of tables. Nice set of tables, laid out clearly. Good job. Box full of boxes. I don't really have too much to add about it. Wizard retreats are good, and it's nice to think of them outside of always towers. Though, you don't have to. This is something, too, you can apply to other class domains. Fighters don't have to live in castles, or you might think about, well, what kind of different castle layouts besides, I'm not talking about historical, it's Mont and Bailey versus what other one. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about more, why couldn't a fighter have a cliff face abode, that they've tunneled out of the side of a cliff and put their parapets there, and that's where they are. And that's kind of a neat idea for an abode for a fighter, right? So I could see using this and making a bunch of these for all kinds of different classes. Interesting ideas for where they may be. That's beyond just the stereotypical tower, castle, guild. All right. Good job, box full of boxes. I already upvoted you, so I can't upvote you again. Someone made a custom class for 5 Torches Deep, but since I have not yet read 5 Torches Deep, I will have to skip that one until next time. And please, in the chat, if you're in here, and I see 9 folks are in here, so I will reiterate, if you're in here, please give us a thumbs up. Helps me out. If you're not subscribed and you're liking what you're hearing and seeing, then, hey, go ahead and subscribe. And also, in the chat, if I'm passing through something on these pages, right, and you see something that interests you, you want to read it, you think it's interesting, and I've skipped it, shout it out. Let me know. All right, we got some other stuff. Something called Funnel World. OSR Funnel World. Funnels were these things from Dungeon Crawl Classics, or as I said before, Death Cab for Cutie, that you take level 0, essentially potential adventures, and you have a bunch of them that you play as a character, and you kind of play through them, and hopefully one of them survives this funnel adventure, and whoever survives becomes your player character. So I'm curious. Let me upload it. Oh, they're doing 5 Torches Deep. So hopefully this will not be super 5 Torches Deep dependent so that I can make sense of it with my lack of knowledge for 5 torches deep. Okay, so it says this is supposed to buy weft with an underscore, a silent underscore, weft. And if you're listening to this later, that gap, that silence was me making the underscore mark with my hand. Okay, hello. Hi, weft. I am looking to start a 5 torches deep campaign. I've talked to my player and I've introduced them to an idea of a funnel world, which is putting in quotes. They're putting in quotes. Type level 0 intro. Here's a brief summary. A funnel is an adventure in which the player characters start as a motley crew of ordinary villagers who find themselves in extraordinary circumstances. Common folk thrown into a crucible of death and terror, who struggle merely to come out the other end in one piece. Many, and sometimes all of these poor souls die horrible deaths over the course of a funnel adventure, but those lucky enough to survive are transformed by the extremity of their experience. While most fantasy RPGs start the PCs off as heroes, a funnel adventure concretely demonstrates how common folk become heroes. It is their origin story. I would like to point out that I don't really feel like, I guess it's saying while most fantasy RPGs, I feel like in OSR, your PCs are stronger than your typical commoner, but not by much. You're a sliver. You're a little bit better in combat. You don't necessarily have more hit points than they do. So you're a little bit more competent, and obviously you have class stuff that they don't have potentially, but it's short. I almost feel like your first level in an OSR game is you've shown the potential and you've started to rise above your commoners, but you've only started just to show just a little glimpse of what that potential is. And obviously, as you raise up levels, you are realizing that potential more and more. Let's see. And now getting to more the meat of his question, I guess, has anyone successfully ran an OSR funnel to kick off a new campaign? I know the original funnel world that I know is designed for Dungeon World. I just like the thought of everyone rolling like 2 to 4 PC with random stats, random equipment, random jobs, random traits, and being at level 0. Pretty much nobody. I think it will be fun to see how creative they have to get to defeat / overcome enemies and objectives. Most of my players, I think, will think it's funny / fun / heroic to have their PCs die for a cause and not be too attached to them. I also think it will be cool for hopefully at least one of their PCs to survive and make it to level 1 to start Tomb of the Serpent Kings. A few thought questions I have. I know in D&D 5th edition, it's normally whoever has the more quote-unquote attack / attackers are going to have the advantage in most fights. If everyone is controlling 2 to 3 low-level PCs, how much is that going to affect fights? OSR already have a lot of player deaths in it, so not sure if adding more death would make the users make the players think their PCs are more quote-unquote disposable. Don't want to teach them bad habits. Any good way to have this funnel tie into Tomb of the Serpent Kings? Okay. So funnels, the first place I've read about funnels is Dungeon Crawl Classics, which I think most folks would consider OSR. I know it gets talked about, whatever. I don't care about if it's on some edge and you want to dance around what side of the OSR line is. It's OSR enough for my purposes. Oh, here we go. Let's see. Terrence says, Crucible of Death and Terror is the name of my indie folk horrorcore band. There you go. Sounds great. Folk horrorcore is something I definitely want to hear more about. So it's certainly not. It's a concept I think can be easily applied to OSR. I think that. So I don't know. We don't know how many players he's running, but usually I definitely encourage my players to get hirelings. So usually your party is maybe not as big as the troop of villagers. So if you have, say, 4 PCs, they're each controlling 3 characters, you're going to have a band of a motley group of 12. Now, keep in mind that depending on how your battlefield is laid out, they're not all going to be able to get into melee with a single monster anyway. And if you're playing by BX rules or something similar, then they can't just fire with impunity ranged weapons into melee. So there's some limits on how much they can engage, unless they play it smart and maybe have everybody back, right, and try to keep backing up and keep some room between them and attackers while they're throwing rocks or sticks, pointed sticks at them, whatever they've got, until the monsters can close the distance or fall. Also, a lot of even low level monsters have multiple attacks, so you get situations where you have one creature, but this one creature has 3 attacks. and each one of those attacks would be able to down one of those level 0 PCs on contact. So potentially in one round, unless they're always getting to strike first, you could wipe out 2 to 3 PCs easy. Vance A says, hey, Vance A, had first edition had the 0 level N4 treasure hunt module. There you go. Is that one, can we get that one electronically? Is that PDF available on drive-through? Because if it is, then that makes it maybe an interesting choice. If not, might be a little bit too hard to actually get a hold of. But yep, that's not a bad idea at all. So I think a lot of the monsters, and we're also not. Oh, and also not to forget, right? Save versus poison can be deadly. So a single spider that surprises the party gets to strike first before, even if they get knocked out fairly quickly, could take out a couple of PCs. So I think there's a lot of ways to get attrition, and then you're not even getting into traps and anything else that could pop up and give the players a hard time. So I would not worry about who's got the advantage. Sure, they're going to have an advantage, but their attack rolls are going to be lousy. Monsters usually run in groups that are pretty sizable. So you might have 12 of those 0 level villagers, but they're fighting 3, 4, 5, 6 opponents. I wouldn't worry about it. Over the course of a particular dungeon, it'll probably, especially once attrition comes in. And I don't know, I don't remember in DCC. In the classic funnel, are they supposed to always have three characters, or when do they start trying to figure out how you can pick up new characters in there? Is it only after they get to 1? Or I don't remember how that works, or even if they had a mechanic for that. And Vance says yes, it is on drive-through. Excellent. So that's an option. I'll try to find that later, and I will link to it. So okay, so I wouldn't be worried about the attacks. The action economy, and when we talk about in 5th edition, I would not worry about that a lot, especially since the attacks from the PCs are going to be just the most basic kind. 5th edition, what can happen is you can have attacks that will trigger things like stunning opponents and things of that nature, and when you chain a bunch of them together, it becomes very hard for a single monster to save against all of them. And if they lose their save, and then they start losing rounds because they're just kind of stuck, and then the PCs are continuing to wail on them, you get this boulder rolling downhill effect, avalanche of it just all goes to mush. I mean, even without it, the action economy still is a force, but where it really kind of becomes a bit of a runaway train is when they start doing things that are going to stun, take away actions, put actions at severe disadvantages, and they're able to do them a bunch of times until they work, or once they work, then it's just pop, and your monsters just, all they can do is try to make the save to get up, and so they're losing rounds, and the PCs are piling on actions. That is not going to be a problem with level 0 PCs. They don't have those kinds of capabilities. And then again, monsters more. I would guess more than in 5th edition, low level monsters in OSR are apt to have claw bite attacks, and so they're going to be equivalent to 3 of those. Just one of those monsters is equivalent to 3 of those villagers in terms of combat, and more effective because they're going to have a better numbers to hit, potentially better hit points. So I don't think that's a problem. Any good way to have this funnel tied to Tomb of the Serpent Kings? Maybe they're going to find something that's going to lead them on to Tomb of the Serpent Kings. Maybe the funnel could drop them in front of Tomb of the Serpent Kings if Tomb of the Serpent Kings was maybe a lower level in the dungeon, and assuming you don't want them to go back to town for whatever reason. They could find somebody that knows something about Tomb of the Serpent Kings. There's probably a bunch of different ways to handle that if you want to. Let's see what some of their comments are. Memgawa says, the funnel with which I'm most familiar in OSR is the Dungeon Crawl Classics funnel. So the question is will the attackers, right, that action economy will depend on what level 0 adventures are like. If player characters have very low hit points, it should not be a problem. I would think fights will become much more swingy, but that shouldn't be that big an issue. I would agree with that. And then on the second question of player deaths, which I didn't address, but he says player deaths, or they say player deaths players may find that they are more attached to one character than the others, may try to prioritize the survival of that character, in which case they will hopefully be taught to be careful with that character. Yes, I don't think that the PCs are disposable at low levels, and I don't think it's wrong for your players to get that sense. And I think what will naturally happen is once they're able to get somebody, and look, for some games it's not difficult. In my game I'm running, And I'm not particularly pulling punches. The characters are a bit stronger, maybe even substantially stronger than their vanilla OSR counterparts, but I'm throwing them at tons of monsters, particularly out of the wilderness, and they've been fairly smart in, for the most part, not picking battles that seem fairly unwinnable, about retreating when taking that as an option, not looking at it as that is their right, or, they're naturally given right to win every combat, things like that. So I haven't had any deaths in my campaign yet, but I think the higher they get, they're going to be more mindful of their characters, and their characters will become more survivable. So I wouldn't worry about the players thinking I want to throw my character away. Like you get your, especially if something like an elf or a magic user up to 3rd or 4th level, you're not going to want to throw them away, because you're going to recognize all the work you had to put in, all the survival you had to do to get up there. And you think, especially like I play the classic method. If you're level 4, you die, you're starting off level 1, which is a great disincentive for saying, I'm just going to toss this guy into the fire so I can bring in my level 4, whatever. No, level 1, back of the line. It's not as bad as a lot of people make it out to be, because of the difference in experience points, and especially if you have mortality as a recurring feature in your game, it will all even out in the end. But it will make people care more about what happens. And then he suggests they also suggest adding the 5th edition subreddits, but I think he's not looking for 5th edition so much. Oh, well, it's 5 Torches Deep, I guess, is where he's riding that line, because it's trying to bring, it's kind of got 5e mechanics, I guess, OSR feel, right? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't read it yet. But I think this is a fair place to ask, because he is talking about, or they are talking about, the OSR bits of 5 Torches Deep and not the 5th edition E bits. Someone else points out Sailors on the Starless Sea for inspiration. They're also saying check out Dungeon Crawl Classics. Okay. Lair of the Lamb is a funnel of sorts. Call of the Colossus. That's a cool, I like that name. All right. Some other people saying, go to 5th edition. No, you don't need to go to 5th edition. That was a fine question. Fine question by Weft. But I have no other wisdom for you. All right, well, let's see. Oh, I didn't, no, I don't need, there's nothing to link to. My Alt After Dark PDF release. I have no idea what that is. Okay, custom classes. Don't know what that is. Oh, that's for 5 Torches Deep again. I have not played or run any free Kriegspiel games. I'm interested in investigating the free Kriegspiel stuff, but I haven't done it yet. I'm not sure how I would, what I would need to do to make a video on it, if I could do it as a stream, or what I need to do it in something where I can kind of compose my thoughts more. I'm not sure, but I am interested in kind of investigating it, but I haven't done the investigative part yet. So turning a hex crawl in a board game. Let's see, recommend them a book. How to use sub hexes and atlas hexes in the game. They just kind of fit within each other. So I'm not sure what the question is. This is what is interesting to me. Okay. And I let me give them an upvote. And I think it's, you get your own biases and everything else. One of the fascinating things I found about making the hex crawl videos and videos in general, particularly hex crawl videos, is the things that seem sort of self-evident and easy to me, that other folks find, find difficult and or confusing, right? And so for me, you start off with 6, you divide them. That's 6 mile hex. You divide them into smaller numbers, whichever ones kind of fit, and do the little bit of math. And there's your sub hexes. You fit so many 6 mile hexes into a larger one. There's your atlas, or however many levels you want to have, right? Easy. But this stuff, it causes people aches and pains. So I appreciate that. I don't really have any wisdom to add to it. And I'm sure he's already got 17. They already have 17 responses. So I'm not going to. I don't think I really have much to add in an educational way. But it's easy to forget. I think one of the things that, I guess maybe my ultimate comment on that is, it's easy to forget when you're dealing with other people what you know versus what they know, what's easy for them. And this is where I think, I've harped on this before, but people love to think of OSR as like, oh, the mechanics are so easy. But for some people, they're not. Having all those different mechanics that we take as kind of character add a lot of confusion for people. Not everybody. Some people take to it and love it. Some people don't. I don't have long sessions with my players, but I routinely, just about every week, I have to explain it. If I say roll under strength, the next question is going to be inevitably, what do I roll again? Right? Because sometimes it's rolling under. Sometimes, you're rolling to attack. You want to roll high. Sometimes it's a D6. They might ask me, which die am I rolling? Something like the D20 system, for as much as people, depending on where you come from, either love it or hate it, having that single mechanic that all you got to teach somebody is roll D20, then the only thing you have to worry about is modifiers, and then you tell me the result, is in many ways infinitely easier for someone to grok than all these situational dice. So keep in mind, for me as well, right? I certainly don't mean to denigrate anyone, that some of the things that we find natural or matter of fact to us, for someone else could be a real barrier. All right, this one I seem to already hit. Traveling rules. This one I just read on my off time. Sometimes I will poke in here between Fridays. Let me just let's take a look. Okay, this one was posted by Minadrek. Traveling rules. I'm looking for good wilderness exploration and traveling rules. I really like Trudvang. I have no idea what that is. But the character creation rules are too heavy. It takes a couple of hours to introduce a new player to the system. Replacing departing players wasn't manageable, but during play it really worked without too much dice rolling and bookkeeping. I own Forbidden Lands. I like the Bitter Reach setting, and he included tools to use a hex map, but I didn't like character creation and progression rules. Some races aren't truly used in supplements. I've read through OSE and Worlds Without Number free version, but found only pretty generic guidelines. I still have Ryutama and Death on the Reich companions rules to read through. I'm not familiar with Death on the Reich, but I feel like those rules will still be a bit too specific to the system. At the moment, I use DCC rules for dungeon crawling, but I'd like to have some exploration rules for some of my modules, including Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride, Dread Swamp of the Banshee, Swamp Light, The Bitter Reach, Curse of Runes. Any idea or suggestion? All right, I'm not particularly familiar with any of those things. I mean, I read through most of Forbidden Lands, but I have to go back and finish it. Michael Frager says, that's my tavern generator. Oh, I missed it. Did I miss your tavern generator, Michael Frager? If I did, I'll go back and at least give it an upvote, or put the link in the chat and I'll hop over there and take a look. All right, Zotel. So I don't know. This person seems to be, so I guess here, let me get into my stuff first. So this is so general. I feel like this person has a ton of things. Oh, I like this, but I want more. They got a lot of things that they want a system to meet, but they haven't really done a good job, I think, elucidating as to what these particular things are. They didn't really tell me much. I don't know anything about Trudvang, so I don't know about their system that worked really well without too much dice. They didn't like the stuff in the character creation and progression rules in Forbidden Lands, and I don't remember Forbidden Lands is traveling rules. I mean, look, if Minadrek were to find me on Reddit or ask me directly, I would say go check out some of my hex crawling videos where I go fairly in depth on the traveling stuff, but I don't necessarily what's the word I'm looking for? I don't necessarily recommend a single. I think I talk more generically, more basically. It seems like he is not looking for something generic, since that's what that's what they ding OSE and Worlds Without Number for, is being generic. So he doesn't want something generic, but he's afraid his other ones are too tied to their systems. I didn't say much about their particular system, and they put a bunch of some modules, and I don't know if those feel like they would all belong in the same setting anyway. So I really don't know enough to know what they're looking for. I would say is start with the very generic guidelines and then build up the parts that you want built up, minimize the parts you want minimized, and then you can always search for house rules, other supplements, other source books that then can fill in the gaps. So if you wanted the Into the Word and Wild had great rules for all kinds of elements of traveling, if that stuff appeals to you, like the hunting or the skinning and meat making, or how they've abstracted resources, pull them out. You could pull one of them out. You could pull all of them out, right? Do that. But And I think that's a good basic. I would say if you're looking for traveling rules and you're playing the OSR game, then Basic Expert or Old School Essentials or the Three Brown Books or something like Worlds Without Number, any of these kind of generic books is a great starting point because they're generic. They're going to be generic enough to be a great baseline regardless of whatever your setting is. Then you can look at your setting and say, well, my setting, we don't have horses to ride. We've got these flying elephants, and that's going to change things. Okay, great. And you develop some flying rules, and you can go into something like AD&D. I think AD&D in the core book or something has more the gets more into the nitty gritty of flying creatures and how they might work as far as transportation, or I don't know, whatever it is, right? I'm playing in Swamp World, so I don't really care about what's happening in the plains, but I want to be more granular with different types of swamps. Great. I'm playing in the tundra. Okay, great. Right. You can dial it in from there. But I would say, as a nice baseline, start with the generic rules. But this, I just feel like they're being fairly picky without giving me enough to be able to say, here are the things you want. Here's what fills it. I think they're going to have to kind of make a hodgepodge. They're going to have to make a quilt of features. So let's see what Zottel says. Ugh, get out of my way, tab. All right, let's give them an upvote. Did I give them an upvote? I did. Zottel says, I use this system when they posted a link that we will. So I'll go into their link and maybe that'll be the last thing. Has been posted here to a decent reception in the past. It focuses on ease of use rather than realistic survivalism. There is a 2-page PDF at the bottom of the post with just the system, but the post walks you through the design process first because I find systems posted without rationale are often useless. Useless, I tell you. Per mentioned in another post, its direct inspiration is the OD&D Avalon Hill Hex Crawl Travel Rules. Ooh, that is excelente. Okay, we're going out here. This is where we're going out. We're going on a high note, and our high note is this. Posted to the Simulacrum, exploring OSR design as an answer to that question of traveling rules. Posted on May 1st of 2020. So it's an oldie, but not that old, obviously, but a goodie. I will put a link to it. The article is called Making Wilderness Play Meaningful. Drop into the chat, and there you go. Feel free to pull it up in your browser of choice. Just take a moment to drop it in my notepad so I can remember to add it back into the show notes when I'm done. Okay, let's get back to it. Might be a long one, so let me take a sip of coffee for the working man. All right. I'm now reading the words of, do me a favor, blogs. I want to give you credit, right? You have created this post. Put your name, your nom de plume, or however you want to be known, put it at the top of your article. So when I say, hey, I'm reading this article from May 1st, 2020 about this I don't have to try to figure out who the heck wrote it. So now it looks like I scroll all the way on the bottom. Maybe they'll give me a name. Who is this? And they didn't put a name? Okay. No name. Just by the Simulacrum, OSR Simulacrum blogspot. All right, so this is actually it looks like this is on the shoulders of a previous post, which this is long enough. I just don't think I have time to go back and go into the history of how they got here. Terrence says, quilt is a very nice way to say kludge. Well, yeah. Yes. Well, I'm hoping that if you do it well, it won't seem kludgy, but it'll feel like the pieces are integrated together. You hope. The existing D&D rules for hex crawl style games, I guess is what he's saying, are vague, or they're saying are vague in a frustrating way, not a freeing way, time consuming and not conducive to actual exploration. Here's what I concluded I wanted instead. Okay, so here are the things. This is, I guess, their design goals, if you will, for this system. An elegant hex-based system for overland travel. I'm gonna skip his things. I'm gonna try to, because it's long. I'm already over an hour. Haven't eaten lunch yet, so let me try. I'm just gonna hopefully get to the meat of this thing without butchering it too much. Butchering. Interactions. So first, an elegant hex-based system for tracking overland travel. 2, interactions and effects not already present in dungeon play. 3, player-facing mechanics. Okay, so those are his design goals, so to speak. So the first one he's addressing is an elegant hex-based system for tracking overland travel. So they admire the OD&D system of hex and points-based travel, despite it requiring the outdoor survival board game. This is one of the cases where they think the original D&D got it right, and AD&D, in the quest for more rules and more granularity, went astray. Since my primary goal is to play a hex crawl anyways, let's go back to that. And I have the outdoor survival game, and I should probably break it out and go through it, but I don't have it where I am here, so I can't. But I do own it. I managed to pick it up on eBay, I think, or somewhere a while back. So it is worth kind of looking at because it's kind of cool, just because of this connection it has with the original game and the proto original, the stuff before the kind of proto, Blackmore and whatever before it became codified into OD&D. Using hexes and points as the foundation of the system in a stroke gets rid of the awful miles versus hexes interaction problem. First, we need to set a hex scale. Outdoor survival used 3-mile hexes. OD&D used 5-mile hexes. However, I'm going to standardize on 6-mile hexes thanks to this seminal post over at the Hydra's Grotto. And I'm not going to go into that post, but it is a nice post. It just lays out the advantages as they see it of a 6-mile hex, which I tend to agree with. The scale is reasonably common and works well. Now, for a moment here, we have to switch to miles per day of travel, solely for the purpose of establishing a baseline of how far a group can travel each day. Assuming open ground and no major obstacle, OD&D allowed characters to cover 15 miles per day, while first edition went for 24 or 30 miles per day, depending on whether you use the Player's Handbook or DMG, each of which had different rules. BX, BECME, and second edition AD&D all went with 24 miles per day, which became the standard that's carried right through to 5th edition. As 24 is a power of 6, and 30 is going to be as high as a base, a bit high as a base due to some other modifiers I'm adding later, it's going to work well with our 6-mile hexes. So I'm going to stick with what's generally expected. Now, I go for a much slower rate. I go for about 12 miles. But I play a little loosey-goosey on the player-facing side with how far, hexes. They don't see hexes. They see it. So I go with sort of, everything's kind of ish. And I've actually been thinking of in my game of switching to using leagues and furlongs because I want to get out of the precision that there might be an expectation with miles that it's been calculated out. And because there's that little bit of abstraction between miles and leagues, I can keep it kind of loose. Well, there still can be some precision. It's a couple of leagues away. I want to loosen that up a little bit, as opposed to them thinking like we've got some kind of GPS system that's telling us with some kind of precise accuracy how many miles away they are. That's me, but this is fine. Maybe I might be in the vast majority as moving 12-ish miles away, but I kind of like the 2 hexes a day if things are nice system. That's me. All right, with the scale chosen, that gives a walking, unburdened party the ability to cover 4 clear hexes a day. It looks like they're pulling here from, this might be from BX. There's a quote from BX. Or maybe it's somewhere else, because this hex entry cost must be something. Do they say where this is from? No. So I will read this image, which is quoting a text in a table from somewhere that they are not. It might be their own thing, or they're pulling it from a source that they have not yet mentioned. But what this says is travel overland is measured in hexes, with each hex being 6 miles across. Your typical party can cover 4 hex points per day. The cost in hex points to enter a hex depends on its base terrain type, as seen below. Unlisted terrain features such as great rivers, canyons, and the like can further raise the cost. I saw this in something else we looked at in one of the other videos, but I don't remember it. I'll probably have to go back and find it. But this idea of having entry costs is interesting. And the terrains they give are plains, steppe, or farmland, which has an entry cost of 1. Hills, woods, desert, and rough terrain has an entry cost of 2. Mountains, jungles, and swamps has an entry cost of 3. Interestingly, that I don't know if hills would be part of. Oh, hills. Never mind. I just skipped over it. So hills with woods and desert as being in the middle ground of costing 2 to enter. Simple enough, I think, with a 6-mile mountainous hex taking the better part of a travel day to navigate. Next, we need to allow for environmental variance. I don't want to get too bogged down. I don't want to get bogged down in 1,000 subfactors here. In the same way that all terrain falls into 3 base categories, I'd like only a handful of modifiers to the above. All right, so here we have some modifiers. If it's heavy rain, deep snow, thick fog, you're going to add 1. If it's some kind of extreme temperature, hot or cold, you're going to add 1. If you have good roads or excellent trails, you can subtract 1. And if you're encumbered, you're going to add 1 per level of encumbrance. So if it's hard to see and or hard to move, the rate slows. If there's extreme heat or cold, it also slows. A frozen, snowy mountain will be less than 6 miles a day. Though if it was in the dead of winter, I'd just say mountain travel was impossible, as classically when winter came, many mountain passes closed altogether and people could be stuck up there all season. This just covers blank slate, first snow on the mountain type situations. Alternately, good roads can boost your travel rate to 30 miles a day. Encumbrance is noted at the end of the above chart. It needs to be covered. But this is trickier in that there's a lot of different encumbrance systems out there, and so we'll need to keep things simple if we want the mods to easily transport over to whatever system is being used. Le Chat, hello. Hello, Le Chat. Glad you can make it here. Okay, so we're on to encumbrance level. So they have looks like they have a table here with a burden level, a combat speed, and a hex modifier. So if you have no burden, you're at full speed in combat. If you have a light burden, you lose a quarter of your combat speed. Moderate burden, you lose half. Heavy, you lose 3/4. And if you're a mobile, then you have none, and the modifier cost goes up by 1 until you get to a mobile, which has no modifier cost since you cannot move. Hence, you are immobile. What light, moderate, and heavy means is something you'd have to define for yourself, but the matching combat speed penalty should give you a guideline. For AD&D, they could translate to heavy, very heavy, and encumbered loads. For BX, they match up neatly to leather armor, and metal armor plus treasure. For Beckme, it would be the 2nd through 4th burden categories, which have the same combat move percentage penalties. For Lamentations of the Flame Princess, they translate straight across to light, heavy, and severe encumbrance. Okay, so there we go. And now we have to consider mounts. I've not made these massive speed boosts, as I'm assuming long-distance travel rather than the short dashes. You have to be careful not to ride them to death or break their legs. Yes, I go with this too. If you're on your horses and you're riding for long-distance travel, you are not moving the way I figured, and someone could come in here, an equestrian, someone who is a equine scholar can correct me, but I don't feel like you're moving really that much faster, especially if you're carrying a wagon. It's obviously if there are people in your party who are not mounted. The way I look at it is your advantage is obviously if you do need to hoof it at speed over a short distance, you have that option. You have gears you can go to. You simply do not have if you're on foot. You're not exhausting yourself as much through travel. You're saving yourself. And of course, what you can carry becomes amplified because you have saddlebags and other things you can put on your horse or in a wagon that you are not having to carry yourself. Le Chat says, good French pronunciation. Thank you. Well, I took several years of French and I lived in a French-speaking place for a while, though it was ages ago, and I have forgotten more probably than I ever knew. So there are very low limits to my good French pronunciation until you get into butchered American French pronunciation. So apologies in advance. All right, so now we're going to have some creatures, some combat speeds, and some daily hex points. So camels have a combat speed of 5, hex points 5. Donkeys or mules, combat speed 40, hex points 5. Elephants, combat speed 40, hex points 5. Giant lizards, cool, combat speed 60, hex points 5. Draft horse, combat speed 40, hex points 5. Riding horse, combat speed 60, hex points 6. Warhorse, combat speed 50, hex points 5. And an ox, combat speed 40, hex points 4. I'm assuming the worst terrain, 3-point hexes, you'd have to walk your mount, so they won't help you to race through jungle or mountains, which makes sense. The main advantage to the system is there's almost no tracking travel across hexes. That is, you're either in one hex or the next. At most, you'll have one fractional hex per day, the one at the end of the day, when you might run out of points for the day before making it to your next hex. For example, if you want to enter a woods hex, 2 points, but only have 1 point left, you spend the 1 point call a day and pick things up the next morning. This ensures that you avoid having to record progress in awkward fractions, like, say, 1.43 hexes per day, which can easily happen with the AD&D system, e.g. 3.5-mile hexes, with a speed of 5 miles per day in the mountains on heavy horses. I see. So that is a nice advantage to the points. But I don't know that I'd make it. I'm not sure if they would make this a player-facing thing, because I probably wouldn't. I would keep that to myself, because I don't want the players to be aware of hex borders and things. I just want them to be in the fiction. So I wouldn't want to have them have the points. But I can see how that would be helpful. You know, I don't know that how much I would need that kind of precision, because again, I like to play a little bit loose. Or if you're right at the border, I don't know, like, okay, you cross over. Or I'll talk about that if it is one main feature, like you're going from hills into forest, right? We can talk about that transition as the hills are getting lesser and lesser and the forest is being built up, assuming that the hills themselves aren't forested, which they could be. Oh, the shot says, no need to apologize. I sound good. Oh, thank you. Thanks for coming in. And if you're not subscribed, subscribe so we can chat more often, and give it a thumbs up. Anyhow, I don't tend to think that I need to be super detailed with exactly how far you're going within a hex like that. But I can see it being handy, and I can see adapting it for my own usages. Okay, and now lastly, I wanted some player choice available even here. I suppose what mount to buy is sort of a choice, but it's not quite what I had in mind. I'm thinking the basic dilemma in the desire to push on, go faster, versus the desire to move at a normal pace, or even slow down and be extra cautious. Yep, I like to integrate that with my games as well. So there to have two different things here. So apart from your normal marching, there's forced marching. On a day when forced marching, the party adds 1 to their hex point allowance, but cannot forage and gains 1 fatigue level at day's end. Such a grueling pace can be kept up until a marcher is heavily fatigued. Most NPCs so fatigued will begin pressing for at least one full rest day, and refusal may provoke morale checks, which could be super important. A day of full rest is required to remove 1 level of forced march fatigue from most creatures, but it might work differently for mounts. And then there's a cautious march. The party reduces their pace so as to better spot and avoid alerting potential enemies. While marching overland that day, subtract 2 from the group's hex point allowance, but apply a +1 bonus to all rolls for overland random encounters. So interesting here is that you only get 1 extra if you go forced march, but you lose 2 if you go cautiously. I'm not sure if there's a math reason or something else they're gaming a bit to why you would not want to just make it a +1 or -1 like that. So I'm not sure, but maybe they consider the penalty for forced marching more a hindrance than the benefit of marching cautiously. But then I might say, well, just make it a +2 bonus, something like that to even it out more. Nothing says cautious march. I don't have that. It's a good idea. It is. And I've used that in my game. I didn't call it that, but essentially the party, when they started getting out in the wilderness and when they were just traveling from A to B, the cautious march, they never really thought about it. They never came to me and said, hey, can we go slower to avoid detection? When I started to think about it and integrate it in my campaign is when they were looking for something. Like they were going around a large hill and they were thinking there might be a hidden entrance. There's a castle on top of the hill, and they were hoping they might find some way in through the bottom of the hill. If you're thinking Conan, the end of Conan the Barbarian, when he has to get into Thulsa Doon's place, right, and they end up going through some cavern cave system, and maybe that's how they escape. But anyway, there was a kind of cave system at ground level, and you go up into the complex or something like that, right? They're looking for that, but they were thinking it might be a relatively small feature. So I talked about, well, you can go at your normal pace, but there's a good chance you're going to miss it. You're trying to essentially make distance your primary goal, or you can slow down your pace and increase your chances of finding things until you can move. I gave them the option of you can move really slowly and you'll be ensured of finding it. You were essentially going over the terrain with a fine-tooth comb. So I actually gave them multiple levels of you can slow your pace accordingly. The more you slow it, the better your chances will be of spotting something, until you get to the point where you're going so slow you're going to spot it if it's there. But it hadn't come up in terms of detection, but we could run it this. I could see that same thing, right? You can move so slowly that you really are sneaky and they'll really have to be looking for you to find you, or faster and faster. Yeah, it is I agree. It's a good thing. And now I definitely would have player pacing. Those definitely kind of options. I want to have the party have their ability to choose and make informed decisions about how they march. Forced marches are, of course, a travel staple. Procedurally, there's rarely a need for speed. There's always a need for speed. Clearly, they have never watched any of the Fast and Furious movies. But when a curse or lethal disease kicks in, or it's a race against time against the Grimlock hordes, rules for extreme haste are valuable. With a forced march on clear terrain, a unit can cover up to 30 miles a day, 36 if good roads are present. This is well within the realm of the possible. The American 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment in late 1942 covered in a 3-day forced march 136 miles with full equipment. There you go. Regarding the note on fatigue, I have my own separate fatigue system that defines what light or heavy fatigue is, like encumbrance. I'm presuming you could define what those labels mean yourself rather than me trying to shoehorn yet another new system into this post. The relevant gameplay effect here is that assuming you're fresh, you can force march for up to 2 days, fresh to light fatigue on day 1, light to heavy fatigue on day 2. The cautious march is the more unusual choice. While I found the in-depth hex crawl on the Alexandrian blog to be far too in-depth for my liking, the idea of the cautious approach was one that appealed to me, and so I salvaged it for my own rule set. How this ties into random encounters, I'll get to later. Oh my goodness. All right, oops. Let me hit nothing's got something else in the chat here. I have a cost to move through a hex and a cost to explore the hex, but I also like cautious movement rate. Yep. The cost to explore the hex is very interesting as kind of an abstracted feature too. So that's cool. And it's definitely a way that if they have, I guess if you wanted to make the points player facing, you could say, well, you don't have enough points to enter the next terrain, but you could use maybe those points to explore where you are. Could be interessant. Okay, boy, there's a lot going on here. Okay, interactions and effects not present in dungeon play. This was their second design goal. I'm gonna be a little bit briefer here on their text just because I'm mindful of the time. Exploration versus survival. I'm going to skip through some of this. In short, though frequently confused, survival and exploration are not the same thing. Yes, this is true. Survival rules don't actually facilitate exploration. In fact, they make exploration more onerous. That's also true. Mechanically, more difficult, and in terms of the metagame, often outright tiresome. As old school games aren't adverse to adversity, greater difficulty isn't necessarily bad, but tiresome always is. And even if one doesn't find it tiresome, conflating survival and exploration is unlikely to make wilderness exploration compelling. This is true. As such, survival is not really what I'm interested in. And if you are, you might want to check out things like the Forbidden Land system. In terms of survival elements, I do like weather is good, but this is going to be long as it is, so I'll possibly look that up at a future date. Disease, I see as a generic system. Okay, let's see. Fatigue, they see the same way. All right. Yeah, I don't like crafting either. Okay, hunting is simple enough. All right, so here we go. So they're getting down, finding your way. Now to the exploration system. Here's how you make your way from hex to hex. Okay, good. Let's get to this. Navigation. When a party enters a hex that lacks a road, trail, coastline, or river through it to the next hex they're heading into, party member makes a navigation check by rolling a d12. From this roll, subtract the hex's base hex entry cost and another -6 if there's thick fog, a blizzard, a sandstorm, or the like in the hex. Remove up to 2 points if these penalties if the party has any members with the fieldcraft feat for that hex's terrain type. So I guess they using the sort of craft skill system from Lamentations. Lamentations, I think, calls it bushcraft. They have fieldcraft. On a result of 1 or less, the check fails, the party is lost. To find their way again, the party must spend 1 hex point. They then make another navigation check. Failing the navigation check means the party is still lost. I do like this idea of using the points, and if you're out of points and you're just, I guess you start thinking about if you want to take exhaustion and move to a forced march or if you just have to rest, right? The check is skipped if the party has a respectable map or knowledgeable guide for that hex. And then for random encounters, each navigation check triggers 1 roll for random encounters in that hex. Woo, so that's rough. Because you could easily pile up some of those checks. I imagine. Maybe not. All right, they've got a fieldcraft. It's basically that kind of survival skill. And they use D12. Okay, so I think we get the idea of what fieldcraft is. I'm not going to get too far in the weeds on that. So you're going to enter a hex. You're going to make a check. They just want to keep it simple. That's fine. Okay, so now we go on to exploring. So you've made your navigation skill check and all is well. Now what? All right, so I'm going to blow this up a little bit. Searching. Only entering a hex allows a party to determine its features. There are two types of hex features, overt and hidden. Overt features might not be encountered automatically, but require no special effort to run into them. For example, a caravan met by any party entering the hex by day on a d6 roll of 4+ is an overt feature despite the chance to miss it. Hidden features may or may not exist in a given hex, but can only be found if the party searches the hex, moving off the beaten path to seek out points of interest there. A search requires spending the same number of hex points that it costs to enter the hex, and, like entering a hex, is only complete when the full hex point cost is paid. The party then makes another navigation check for the hex. Failure means that the party is lost. Resolve this as normal. When the party succeeds, this reveals one hidden feature in the hex. If any, normally at random, but some hexes may have a specific order to how their features can be revealed. A hex can have both overt and hidden features. For example, an overt group of orcs blocking a bridge and demanding a toll may be operating out of a hidden orc lair in a network of caves a mile or two off. And then lost, since a party must pass their navigation check to find a feature, becoming lost normally interrupts the search. However, the GM may allow certain hidden features to be discovered even by lost parties. For example, the party, disoriented and fatigued, stumbles upon an ominous, blood-caked altar in the midst of a clearing where no birds sing. Do. Right. So that's cool. I like it. In a hex crawl, it's often assumed that you just find whatever is in a hex once you entered it. Yeah, I don't tend to play that way. I don't know if I've played in any that just give you the feature. And usually the only thing you find out when you enter the hex is kind of the basic terrain of the hex, and then it's how you make your way through. And then I'm looking at either sub-hexes or just what I've drawn in the map on kind of where they are. So unless it's obvious, right? You're nearing the Lonely Mountain. When you're in that Lonely Mountain hex, you're seeing the Lonely Mountain, right? You're not really going to miss that one. With this system, as a GM, you'd classify each hex feature as one of two types, overt and hidden. Overt are the classic type, enter the hex, find the thing. Hidden features are your lost cities and hidden caves and clearings and bandit layers and stuff it takes time and effort to uncover. Yep, I do like that. I mean, I like it. I like having that as something kind of mechanically delineated. And it makes it easy to put down some stuff and then have in parentheses or next to it, here are the overt ones, here are the hidden ones. If there's any order in the hidden ones, for example, signposts towards a lost city that are mostly overgrown, you could do like that. A lot of possibilities there. By default, they have hidden features automatically found if the players make the effort to search, with the assumption that not all hexes will have such a thing. And you can figure that out. You can whip that up however you like. Okay, random encounters. You need to have all this tied into the random encounter system to reflect the types of terrain you are using, but also so that player choices are meaningful. Slower pace equals less monsters. Time spent searching equals more monsters. All right, so here's their Overland random encounters. One random encounter check, often called a wandering monster check, is made after each navigation check. To make a check, they're using a d12 roll again, applying all relevant modifiers to the rolls. And the modifiers they have is the base entry cost. Let's see. The action base entry cost is 3, e.g. swamp. The modifier is -3. If it's 2, it's -2. If the hex is unusually dangerous, you're subtracting 1 or 2. If the hex is safe, i.e. it's patrolled, you add 1. If the party has a member with fieldcraft for this terrain type, you add 1. Players moving in a cautious march, you add 1. So they're not adding 1. Interestingly, you're subtracting 2 or 3 if the base entry cost is 2 or 3, but you're not subtracting 1 if the base entry cost is 1. So I'm guessing that is your kind of default. On a result of 1 or less, an encounter occurs. The GM rolls on the appropriate encounter table for that hex type. Camping. If the party spends the night in the wilderness, make an additional random encounter check, subtract 1. If the party keeps a fire big enough to see by going through the night. Though fire scares off some creatures even as it attracts others. If an encounter occurs, randomly roll to see on whose watch, if any, the encounter takes place. Right, so that's your standard encounter stuff. That makes sense. Okay, maybe we're getting to comments. All right, so that's basically the end. And they have a PDF of these, which I will take because it seems good and I want to study it a bit more. It looks like this is of some kind of larger book. I linked to the to the blog post. So you can go there and grab that document. And it looks like they updated it in September of last year. And then there are comments. I mean, overall, I think it's a really nice system. I would say it probably meets the design goals that they want. And I someone said in the original Reddit post that led us out here, I do appreciate them going through and stating, here are my design goals. Here are the things I'm going to do, which I think a lot of people will lose track of, because people will you see this a lot. Like, I want to have a wound system. And okay, I have no problems with wound systems. I don't particularly love wound systems in a D&D style game, but I don't have a particular problem with it. But I think when you do that, hey, it's a fair question to ask, why are you doing a wound system? What effects are you hoping to achieve? What are the design goals of your wound system? It could be to make combat feel more impactful. It could be to slow the game down because you want characters to have to use more time to rest, right? For injuries and things like that, as opposed to how they're resting already. All these different, it could be a number of different things. That's just your setting. You're looking for something that's got more, you just want more blood and gore, but you want it, mechanical, those kinds of things. Great. But I think too often people don't come up with particular design goals they just put together a bunch of rules and stuff and don't look at, which I think this author did a great job also of looking at what's already out there. If I'm doing something different than they're doing it, what don't I like about it? What am I trying to change? And again, keeping those design goals of why I'm doing it. So I think that's really well put together. I can dig it. So that's the last one I will cover for today, as I'm going to closing in on 2 hours, which I think is pushing everybody's patience. Thanks again to everybody who came in the chat. Before you all bail out of here, if you haven't already, give us a thumbs up. Helps me out. Doesn't do you any harm. Assuming you enjoyed it. If you didn't and you decided to come in and hate watch and listen to this, I guess thanks anyway. And if you're not subscribed, you came in here and you like this kind of content, if you like these Reddit roundups and you'd like me to do more of these Reddit roundups, so giving me the thumbs up and subscribing to the channel helps let me know that, hey, you guys like this stuff. I like doing it, and I feel like every time I've done one of these, and I've done quite a few of them now. Well, I mean, quite a few. I don't know, half a dozen or so of these. I think each one of them, I tend to come away with something that I want to think about more, work on more, figure out how I can use for my own campaign. So hopefully this stuff was useful for you guys and come up with stuff that you guys could use in your campaigns. Anyone have any last comments in the chat? Anything going on? I don't have any particular programming notes for now. I'm not sure if anything's going to happen on the weekend. My game next week should be on a Wednesday, so probably look for another, hopefully both a prep chat and a recap chat around that game. I have a bunch of stuff in my reading pile that I need to pick to see what I'm going to read next. Fred Daniels says, fun stream. I'm glad I caught this one live. Yeah, I'm glad you made it too, Fred. Always nice. Michael Fraker says, look forward to it all week. Oh, great. Well, I'm glad. I appreciate folks saying they like these. I didn't think, I know people have said that folks do this on Twitch. They'll stream reading stuff, but I really had no awareness. I think I originally did this as kind of a pre-stream. I was going to go on, I think it might have been my first stream with Bandits Keep with Daniel about something. And I just kind of was looking, I wanted to sort of get online and I had the time to kill. You ever feel like you get in a situation where you have a little bit of time to kill? It's not enough to really do anything, but it's too much. It's not like I can get on early. I can't get on the stream early because it just hasn't started yet, right? So it's like, well, I have so much time and I know I'm going to need to stream. I thought, let me go look at what's going on. I'll just kind of do that as a thing. And it's kind of become a weekly ritual, and I hope I will keep doing it weekly as time and workload and all that allows, and family commitments and blah, blah, blah. I will continue trying to do it weekly. And yeah, I feel like I've uncovered some gems. People do seem to like it. I like doing it. So yeah, I'm going to keep on keeping on. But I'm going to let you guys go. Have a great weekend. If you're in the chat, if you're watching this or listening to this later, I don't know why I put that on my head. Have a great rest of your night, weekend, night, day, whenever you are watching or listening to this. Game on, everybody. And I will talk to you later.